A waiter at an upscale hotel dismisses and mocks a casually dressed man, not realizing it's Snoop Dogg in disguise. But when Snoop calmly reveals that he owns the hotel, the tables turn in a way no one expected. What happens next will leave everyone stunned and teach a powerful lesson in respect and humility. Don't miss this jaw-dropping story of judgment and redemption. Watch how Snoop Dogg's calm response transforms the moment into a lesson for everyone. Like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories that challenge stereotypes and spark change. The grand lobby of the Platinum Heights Hotel was bustling with activity. Guests in designer suits and evening gowns glided past marble pillars, their laughter blending with the soft notes of live piano music. Among them, a casually dressed man strolled in, wearing a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. His hood was pulled low over his face, and he carried a small duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The man made his way to the hotel's in-house restaurant, his movements relaxed but purposeful. As he stepped inside, the ambiance shifted slightly. The restaurant's staff, polished and poised, exchanged subtle glances. One waiter, a sharp-featured man named Henry, noticed the man immediately and frowned. Henry had worked at Platinum Heights for years, priding himself on catering to the wealthiest clientele. To him, appearances mattered, and this man didn't look like he belonged. With an exaggerated sigh, Henry approached the man, his smile more of a smirk. "Excuse me, sir," Henry said, his tone laced with disdain. "The cafe is down the hall. This restaurant has a dress code." The man paused, glancing up at Henry, his expression calm but unreadable. "I was just looking for a table, he said, his voice low and smooth. Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'm afraid we're fully booked," he said, though several empty tables were visible just behind him. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere." The man raised an eyebrow but said nothing, his gaze flicking past Henry to the room beyond. He stepped forward slightly, but Henry blocked his path, his smirk growing. "Look," Henry said, lowering his voice, "this is a five-star establishment. Our guests expect a certain standard. I suggest you find another place to eat." A few nearby diners glanced over, their curiosity piqued by the exchange. The man stood still for a moment, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. He pulled back his hood slightly, revealing a face that was unmistakable to anyone who had paid attention to pop culture in the last 2 decades. "You sure about that?" the man asked, his voice calm but carrying a subtle edge. Henry's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "Sir, as I said, we're fully—" Before he could finish, a sharp gasp came from one of the guests seated nearby. "Oh my God, is that Snoop Dogg?" the woman whispered loudly enough for the room to hear. Henry froze, his face paling as he looked at the man again, realization dawning like a thunderclap. The calm, confident demeanor, the smooth voice, the unmistakable presence. It was him, Snoop Dogg. And just as the weight of his mistake began to sink in, Snoop gave him a faint smile, leaning in slightly. "By the way," he said softly, "I own this place." The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent at once. All eyes now fixed on Henry, whose face had gone beet red. The tables had turned, but what Snoop would do next would leave everyone in the room speechless. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Henry stood frozen, his polished demeanor crumbling under the weight of Snoop Dogg's revelation. The murmurs of recognition rippled through the room, diners whispering excitedly as they pieced together what had just happened. Snoop straightened up, his faint smile still in place, but there was a glint in his eyes that hinted at something more. "So," he said casually, his voice smooth but unmistakably firm, "still think I should try somewhere else?" Henry's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by an awkward panic that made him shift uncomfortably on his feet. I didn't realize," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Snoop tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but unrelenting. "Didn't realize what?" he asked, his tone sharper now. "That I don't need to wear a suit to be treated with respect?" The question hung in the air, and Henry swallowed hard, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. The other staff members stood at a distance, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of the growing tension. Before Henry could respond, the restaurant manager appeared, hurrying toward the scene. A woman in her late 40s, dressed impeccably in a black blazer, she approached with a mix of confusion and urgency. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her eyes darting between Henry and Snoop. Snoop turned to her, his posture relaxed but his voice carrying a quiet authority. "Depends," he said, shrugging lightly. "Your boy here didn't think I was good enough for your restaurant." The manager's eyes widened, her face paling as she registered who she was speaking to. "Mr. Broadus," she began, addressing Snoop by his real name, "I am so sorry. There's been a misunderstanding." Snoop raised a hand, cutting her off. "Oh, I understand just fine," he said, his tone still calm but laced with meaning. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The room held its collective breath as the manager turned to Henry, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "Henry," she said sharply, "is this true?" Henry stammered, his voice trembling. I I didn't know. I thought—" "You thought wrong," the manager snapped, her voice cold. "I've told you before, we don't judge people by their appearance. This is unacceptable." Snoop watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. Then after a moment, he chuckled softly, breaking the tension. "Relax," he said, waving a hand. "I ain't here to get anybody fired." The manager looked at Snoop, clearly surprised, but she didn't interrupt. Snoop turned back to Henry, his voice softening slightly. "What I do want," he said, "is for you to think about how you treat people. You see someone who doesn't fit your idea of belonging, and your first instinct is to judge. That's not how it works, man. Not here, not anywhere." Henry nodded quickly, his head hanging low. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Snoop studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Apologies a start," he said, "but it's what you do next that matters." The entire room seemed to exhale as Snoop turned back to the manager. "I'll take a table," he said with a grin, "but let's skip the special treatment. Just bring me some wings and a Coke." The manager smiled, relief washing over her face. "Of course, Mr. Broadus," she said. "Right away." As Snoop was led to a table near the window, the room buzzed with excitement. But the night wasn't over yet. What Snoop would do next would leave the entire staff reflecting on their actions. The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though the buzz of excitement lingered. Diners continued to whisper and glance toward Snoop's table, some sneaking photos while pretending to look at their menus. Snoop, however, seemed unfazed, lounging comfortably in his seat as he sipped his drink. Nearby, Henry stood by the service station, his shoulders slumped. He hadn't moved much since the confrontation, his thoughts racing with regret and embarrassment. Marcy, another server and his longtime co-worker, approached him cautiously. "You okay, Henry?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not really," he admitted. "I screwed up. Big time." Marcy gave him a sympathetic look. "Yeah, you did," she said honestly. "But you've got a chance to make it right." Henry glanced toward Snoop's table, his nerves evident. "You think he'd even listen to me after that?" he muttered. Marcy shrugged. "He doesn't seem like the type to hold grudges," she said. "But that doesn't mean you shouldn't own up to what you did." Henry hesitated, then nodded. "You're right," he said, squaring his shoulders. "I'll try." Across the room, Snoop was finishing up his wings when Henry cautiously approached the table. Snoop looked up, raising an eyebrow as Henry stood there, fidgeting nervously with his hands. "Can I help you?" Snoop asked, his tone neutral but curious. Henry cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "Mr. Broadus, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how I treated you earlier. It was wrong and I shouldn't have judged you like that." Snoop leaned back in his chair, studying Henry for a moment. The silence was heavy, and Henry felt his palms start to sweat. Finally, Snoop nodded, his expression softening. "All right," Snoop said. "You're owning up to it, and that's a good start. But let me ask you something. Why'd you do it?" Henry hesitated, then sighed. "I guess I just assumed," he admitted. "I've seen people come in here before, dressed casually, and they usually don't belong. I thought I was just doing my job." Snoop nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "You thought wrong, man," he said. "And that's the problem. You don't know people's stories. You don't know where they've been or what they've done. Judging someone on how they look? That's lazy. And it's not who you want to be." Henry nodded, shame flickering across his face. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Snoop smiled faintly, leaning forward. "Apology accepted," he said. "But remember this. Respect isn't just something you give to people you think deserve it. It's something you give because it shows who you are." Henry nodded again, his posture relaxing slightly. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I'll do better." Snoop sat back, his smile widening. "Good," he said. "Now, how about you get me some dessert? I hear the cheesecake here is fire." The tension eased as laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Henry grinned sheepishly, nodding as he hurried off to grab Snoop's order. The atmosphere shifted again, lighter now, as the staff and diners marveled at how Snoop had handled the situation with grace and wisdom. But as Snoop prepared to leave, he had one more surprise in store for the restaurant, and it would leave everyone there inspired. As the evening drew to a close, the restaurant settled into a calmer rhythm. Snoop Dogg, now comfortably full after finishing his wings and cheesecake, leaned back in his chair with a contented smile. The staff had relaxed, the earlier tension replaced by admiration and gratitude for the way Snoop had handled everything. Just as the manager approached with the bill, Snoop held up a hand to stop her. "Don't worry about that," he said with a grin. "I've got something else in mind." The manager hesitated, confused, as Snoop stood up and addressed the entire restaurant. His voice carried easily, commanding attention without effort. "Yo, can I get everyone's attention for a minute?" he said, his signature charisma shining through. The diners looked up, curious, while the staff exchanged glances. Snoop smiled warmly, his hands in his pockets as he addressed the room. "First off," he began, "I want to thank y'all for having me tonight. This place, it's got good food, good vibes, but more than that, it's got good people." He gestured toward the staff, his smile softening. "These folks right here, they work hard to make sure y'all have a great time, and that ain't easy, so let's give it up for them." The room erupted into applause, the staff beaming as Snoop's words lifted their spirits. Even Henry, still standing by the counter, couldn't help but smile, his earlier shame fading into a newfound sense of purpose. Snoop waited for the applause to die down before continuing. "Now here's the deal," he said. "Tonight I'm taking care of everyone's tab. Drinks, dinner, dessert. Whatever you had, it's on me." Gasps and excited murmurs rippled through the room. A few diners clapped, while others stared at Snoop in disbelief, overwhelmed by his generosity. "But that's not all," Snoop added, his grin widening. He turned to the staff, his tone sincere. "I know how hard y'all work, and I know it's not always easy. So I'm leaving a little something extra for the team. A thank you for keeping this place running like it does." The staff exchanged stunned glances, their disbelief quickly replaced by smiles and even a few tears. The manager stepped forward, her voice shaky with gratitude. "Mr. Broadus, I don't know what to say. This is beyond generous." Snoop waved it off casually. "Ain't about being generous," he said. "It's about respect. Y'all showed me love tonight, even after a little bump in the road, and I appreciate that." With that, Snoop slid his sunglasses back on and gave the room one last grin. "Y'all have a good night now," he said, flashing a peace sign before heading for the door. The diners erupted into applause as Snoop left, their voices filled with admiration and gratitude. The staff gathered near the counter, their spirits lifted by the unexpected turn of events. Even Henry, standing quietly at the edge of the group, felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. As the door swung shut behind Snoop, the restaurant buzzed with energy, the night's events becoming the kind of story people would tell for years to come. For everyone who had been there, it wasn't just about the free meals or the generous tip. It was about the lesson Snoop had delivered with grace and authenticity. Respect, kindness, and humility were worth far more than appearances. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful and heartwarming tales. Stay tuned for the next incredible story that will remind us all of the power of respect and generosity.